Given the fact that we are approaching the end of the year, and I'm sure you or perhaps some of your coaching clients are looking towards Q1 of next year and thinking about having a strategic planning session to look back on 2019 and plan for 2020. We're very happy and honored to present this presentation by Jennifer Faught on how to conduct a successful strategic planning session. For those of you who don't know Jennifer, Jennifer is a coach and entrepreneur who loves to help people align intentional action with beliefs. She spent the past 5 years coaching creative business owners on how to scale their companies while simultaneously building a nationwide online learning platform for business owners. Jennifer has served on the leadership team for a family-owned SaaS and IT business, as well as a venture-backed healthcare company. As an entrepreneur, she launched a graphic design business and sold her learning platform, which grew over 450% in 4 years. Jennifer is currently a scaling up coach with Petra Coach in Nashville, Tennessee, where she helps companies and their teams create clear and actionable ideas and strategies. She really enjoys building processes, workflows, and systems for her clients while moving quickly and easily from strategic planning to execution. Jennifer believes that a business's culture and ability to scale quickly and successfully are determined by finding the right people, putting them in the right position, and then making sure everyone is laser focused and aligned with the company's purpose and goals. We are thrilled to have her join us this morning. As usual, for those of you that might have questions about any part of the presentation, if you would please enter your questions using the chat functionality of this Zoom webinar. We will hold those questions until the end of the presentation, and we will ask Jennifer to answer as many of those at the conclusion. So with that introduction and with those logistics set forth, I will turn the microphone over to Jennifer and thank her in advance for this presentation. Jennifer, it's all you.
Yeah, thanks Eugene and Align team for having me. I'm excited to be here. So strategic planning sessions are usually met with mixed reviews. Some people love them and some people dread them. And today we're going to talk about ways you can increase the productivity of your strategic planning session. We'll talk about keeping the team on track and on topic. And we'll also talk about how you can have some fun while building trust around your team. Today we'll cover 7 ways to make your strategic planning more successful. And these are things that, if executed wisely, will increase that productivity outcomes to your planning session. And you might actually have some fun doing it. So you might be doing some of these things already, which is awesome. Some of these may be new to you. I want to challenge you today to choose 3 things to go do from this webinar. You won't probably go do all of them. I want you to only focus on 3 and actually go do them. In fact, if you can only just focus on one thing, that would be awesome. But doing nothing is not an option, right? So we decide to change something about your planning day and make it a better experience for everyone. Make sure we're getting that done. So first, let's review what a successful outcome is for a strategic planning session. First, let's see, slides aren't working. There we go. First, we're going to review what a successful, reflect on the current performance of the team. So you're reviewing, you're discussing, and learning from the progress that you made in the previous quarter toward those annual and quarterly targets and priorities. Brainstorming is that second step, understanding and identifying those targets and the priorities that the organization might go pursue in the next quarter. So gathering all of those ideas and brainstorming. And then third, setting that direction, choosing the targets and the priorities that the organization will pursue in the next quarter. And finally, developing that plan. As you said earlier, Eugene, we have to go execute. So we have to move quickly from high-level strategy down to the execution part and getting the company aligned around what those priorities look like and how we're going to go tackle them. So that ultimate goal is to identify the things you will go do this quarter to move the company forward and align the team around accomplishing those things. So these 7 tips are a combination of things that are really easy to execute, and some things might take some time and practice. If you don't take anything else away from this webinar today, the last tip I think is the most important. It includes different ways of thinking about your planning session and will dramatically increase the execution rate of your quarterly priorities. And you can even use it in different places other than your planning session as well. So this is me. This is Petra. This is my Petra Coach, avatar. I didn't curl my hair today, so this maybe looks a little different. But I work for a company called Petra Coach. I'm a scaling up coach through Gazelles International, also certified master coach. And I love coaching companies through their scaling journey. I'm here in Nashville, and I work across the country using the practices of the Rockefeller habits. I love Align, shameless plug, and I use it daily with my own coaching practice and with the companies that I work with. So this is my contact information. If you have any questions following the webinar, let me know. So we'll dive in. So the first thing that you can do might seem really simple, but going off-site to have your strategic planning session is really important. This is going to energize your team, and your meeting will be more productive. It also shows the importance of this meeting, and it's going to encourage your team to be more focused because it eliminates those distractions. If you're in your office and you have the chance of being interrupted by people who just need that one thing from you, or you take a break and you get sucked into answering your emails or taking that phone call, when you're away from the office, you aren't distracted and you're not going back to your desk and getting pulled into something. You can also have confidential discussions off-site that you might not be comfortable having on-site. And being in that new environment is going to promote creative problem solving and new perspectives. Bringing a team together in a new places is going to get them out of the familiar and energize them. So it sounds like something really simple, but many companies wait until the last minute and they don't get anything booked. So make sure it's cool, make sure it has good natural light, enough space for your team to spread out and get out of the room to do some of the meeting, so you don't start to feel like those walls are closing in on you around hour 6. Simple but effective tool. Next, establish ground rules. Ground rules are those sets of behaviors that you expect from your team during the planning day. These can be both procedural and behavioral ground rules. So procedural things are things like starting on time, ending on time, no computers out at all, not even face down on the table, because even that is distracting. And the conversations had in the room are confidential. You can broadcast the plan and the outcome, but we don't discuss the discussion that got you there. Then you have behavioral things. These are specific behaviors you want to see and they're more clear. So some examples of this, attack the problem, not the person. You can see on the slide on the far right, it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem. We're all here to make the business better, so let's work on this together. Another tip I have for a behavioral ground rule is no piggybacking comments. Fun graphic there in the middle, but don't repeat just to repeat or agree. Just say, I agree. Ask yourself and ask the team if they're going to add something, make sure it's adding value before, or adding something new before they're speaking. Have a code word. When you're off topic, we'll often use, at Petra Coach, I'll often say like, hey guys, we're in the weeds, or squirrel, like a squirrel moment. And that triggers the person talking without being incredibly feeling rude, that we are kind of off topic and we're not discussing the things that the outcome at the beginning of the discussion identified. And that just pulls the team back. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. So these ground rules, your team has to agree on all of them. You have to announce them, review them, answer questions around them, make sure everyone is bought in. And you guys are responsible for holding each other accountable to these rules. I think overall, just keep these really simple. Anything that's way too complex is going to be hard to police. So the third thing is keep the energy up and make it fun. I've come in as a facilitator after a company has been doing their own strategic planning sessions. And sometimes the attitude toward these meetings can usually be dread, because they feel like they're closed in on a room, and it's just not a positive situation. We like to make sure that it's as fun as possible, and different teams have different ideas of what fun looks like. So ask your team what they want. First things first, keeping that energy up. It's a long day, and studies show that processing new information burns a lot of calories. So there are some things you can do to keep the energy up, like, again, simple things, but making sure your team is doing these, because it's really easy for them to go back to their phone and check email instead of making sure they're going outside, they're stretching, they're moving, drinking plenty of water, making sure you're taking breaks every 60 to 90 minutes. And the other thing about your meeting location, if you have it at a hotel or a place that serves food, they'll roll that cart in of sugary snacks or bagels, and that totally drains your energy. So make sure you're choosing snacks and things wisely. So icebreakers. Sometimes these can feel hokey or cheesy, but they don't have to be that way. Last month, I had a team make paper airplanes with 2 facts people would be surprised to know about them, and we flew them around the room for 60 seconds. When I said stop, they picked up the airplane closest to them, and they had to find that person and talk to them about their interesting facts. It was a blast. It really got the energy up. It got a good laugh out of the room. And we were also able to have them get to know each other better and share some personal things. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes as well. So making sure the right people are in the room also helps keep the energy up. It should be a privilege to be on the team that is working in the business to make it better. Any negativity or including people who don't want to be there is totally going to drag the day down, and it definitely impacts the rest of the group. And I think finally, just ending on a high note for the energy and making it fun. After you recap a day, cheer out to a core value, recognize a team member, go out for beers together. Encourage the planning day team to talk about how awesome the day was and how excited they are about the business. And you can make this a lot more fun. Okay, number 4, building trust in the room. That paper airplane activity also brought a personal aspect to the strategic planning day. Sharing personal things about themselves creates that vulnerability and therefore builds trust. Teams who trust each other are more productive, they're stronger, and on top of that, they want to stick around longer when there's a high level of trust within your organization. You can't expect to just hire like 20 people and then expect them to get to know each other and all get along. So we have to be intentional about building trust. It's important, and you can use strategic planning sessions to do that. So simple ways of getting people to share things when they might not be comfortable sharing things about themselves personally is, this is a good idea that I have, a thumb ball. So simply just have the team stand up and toss this around, pick a finger, and then they have to answer the question that's under the finger. And this is really fun to do coming back from a break. It gets them to be a little bit vulnerable. It gets a good laugh out of some people. And it's a quick and easy way to get them back in the mindset of the meeting after a break. You can get those on Amazon, by the way. They're like $7. Another way to build trust is using a personality assessment like DISC or PI or even Enneagram to learn more about one another. Knowing more personal aspects of your coworkers and their communication style will help them view each other as people they can trust and understand. Sometimes these activities, can feel awkward, and they're only awkward if you let them be awkward. So knowing the outcome that you want to see from these icebreakers and making sure that the team is having conversations around what they've learned from that icebreaker helps them, come to a conclusion, and it can help you have a lot of fun and build trust at the same time. So better conversations can be had when teams trust one another, and your strategic planning session is also going to be a lot better. Using those personal aspects builds that trust, it gets people to share openly, and having those ground rules that we talked about earlier is also going to help with that open sharing. So number 5, use that agenda effectively. Making sure you have an agenda first, which I'm assuming most of you do, but it doesn't have to be timed out to the minute. Know what you want to get done going into that day. You can set some time constraints, but be flexible when conversations need to go longer. A tip I have on this is I always identify the one section of the day that I will cut from an agenda first if we need more time somewhere else, because a conversation might be really meaningful and impactful. We can let it go a little bit longer if needed. Making sure the team is doing speed updates. So moving quickly and being prepared with the information they are sharing. There's a balance between rushing through it and spending too much time on a topic. So any bulky information or spreadsheets or something that the team needs to review beforehand should be sent out ahead of time within 24 hours, 48 hours, so that people can review it, process the information, and then come ready with their information to share. And that's going to keep the agenda moving along. The other thing is communicating outcomes for the day for each section. So you can say, we are not leaving today for the day without these 3 things. So it might be ROC's company priorities for the next 90 days have owners, they have teams assigned, and the plans are in a line. This is the outcome. This is what we want to go do today. And by doing this, everyone will know exactly what you're working toward when you determine that outcome, and it will drive the conversations through the day. When you move into each section of the day, remind the team what the outcome is for that section too. So for example, we're moving into reviewing our SWOT analysis. The outcome for this is to identify the one thing we could go do in the next 90 days that would improve the business. And that will keep you from getting in the weeds, we call it so much, right? So speaking of getting in the weeds, you've got to focus on planning, not solving. You probably aren't going to solve all of your woes and all of your issues in one strategic planning session. And what you can get done is identifying the issues, what different outcome you want to see, assigning an owner and a team to go work on it, and then they go build the plan. And then they go do the work in between the quarterly strategic planning sessions. When you create outcomes like this, it allows for adaptability and flexibility in the how. So the outcomes remains the same, and as you're building your task and building your plan, you can shift that and change that as new information comes in throughout that quarter. So that execution part after the planning session doesn't feel so hemmed in. And so I have this image on the screen because you're going to think this is point A to point B, like we're starting with SWOT and this is our outcome. You're still going to have to train the team. It's going to be a flow. They're going to continue to get into the weeds and you're going to have to pull them back to the outcome. So as the facilitator, having some of those tools in your back pocket to pull the team back is a great way to keep you on track and on time and making sure you're getting the outcomes you want. So number 6, the executive team must be aligned before walking in the room. If you are going to have more than just an exec or leadership team in a strategic planning session, you guys as leaders must be aligned on the outcomes of the day. Having that pre-planning with your executive team is important. A senior leadership team must be aligned around the direction and the strategy of the organization, and the outcome of your pre-planning meeting with exec or leadership is to review that strategic plan and have an idea of what rocks or priorities the team should focus on in the next quarter. So after reviewing your targets and your priorities, your SWOTs, your initiatives, and so on, you have a good idea of what's next for the team, with the outcome of having draft company priorities to pitch to the team the next day or the next week, whenever your full team planning session is, making sure those draft company priorities are in a line. And in that pre-planning meeting, making sure, again, that executive teams are coming with prepared information and numbers that they own, ready with their thoughts. So executive teams not agreeing in a planning day, I've experienced it, not being in alignment for the outcomes of the day, not being aligned on the strategic plan, is usually the #1 way a planning day can go off the rails. Trust in leadership goes totally out the window, and it's incredibly disruptive, and it greatly affects the rest of the team because they can see it and they can sense it too. So that last and final way to make your strategic planning successful, and I feel like this is the most important thing. If you do anything from today, this is important. Always pushing for clear outcomes in your priorities. Writing clear and effective goals and priorities to ensure a successful plan is created. Because if you aren't working on the right plan, if you aren't working on a clear plan, what's the point? To get it right, it should be outcome oriented, and the team must be clear and in alignment with that outcome. So for example, on the screen here, writing weak versus strong priorities, this is how you can get clarity on what the outcome is. So that first one in the left column, when I read implement a marketing plan, that can mean totally different thing to me than it does to someone else on the team. So for me, I might think, oh, well, that means updating the website, or that means sending some emails. What this team did to make this more a stronger written priority, they said new marketing plan is generating 10 qualified leads per week. That's the outcome that we will measure success by. And now I know exactly what I need to go do, and I can use my expertise as a member of this team working on this priority to get to those 10 leads per week. Always look for things like weak, what we call weak words at Petra Coach. Weakly defined outcomes. They use non-specific, generic, vague terms like increase, improve, or focus. So that example on the right says, improve my QuickBooks skills. What does that look like to improve? I have no way of really tracking that. It's not a very smart written priority. So words like these are not specific and measurable. Making sure that you're writing very strong ones will make it super clear. So it's more clear for me to say, I will have 10 hours of online QuickBooks training completed. I think it's important also to mention one owner for each company priority. If more than one person owns it, nobody owns it. So that one person is accountable for getting the work done, but they don't have to do all of the work. They can have a team who is responsible helping them execute. The way you write those priorities must allow for adaptability and flexibility on the how, like we talked about earlier. And if your team members, it allows your team members to own what they will contribute to a successful completion of the priority. So I'd like to share some examples in Align. Since this is an Align webinar, right? So let's look at some examples. So Angel here has generate 520 leads from the new website. This is clear, this is measurable, we know exactly what the outcome is. The child priorities underneath this company priority allow these owners to shift as they get new information in. So Roger knows that he needs to increase site traffic by 6,800. So the owner of this priority will determine the how and determine the tasks, and he is ultimately supporting the company priority of generating 520 leads. He can change and update his tasks throughout the period, showing his progress on the progress bar here on the right, and it allows complete ownership for him. He is committed to doing this, and there's transparency and there's progress on the priorities. So when we talked earlier about going from strategy down to execution, this is where the execution part comes in. There's no sense in you guys sitting in a room, creating these beautiful plans, and then not going and executing on them, which is why Align is such a great tool. So after you've identified those priorities, what you'll go do in the next quarter, you're going to focus at least a couple of hours at the last part of your planning day, talking through the outcomes, the tasks, the owners of these priorities, and making sure that that strategic planning day is more successful. Taking that time to coach each other, to plan it out, and then you're going to do the work and holding each other accountable to do the work. So make sure that you're following up and reporting out on the status of those priorities, which I think is bonus tip number 8, I guess. Making sure that you're using your tasks from your company priorities and your individual priorities as your daily top priorities and your top tasks for the week. Super important to make sure that you are focusing on that to make sure these company priorities are getting completed. So going back to the slides, I challenged you guys today at the beginning of this webinar to choose no more than 3 things to execute to make your strategic planning more successful. Love for you to take some time now to write down those 3 things, and you can even practice writing them as a strong outcome. And I always like to say 2 is better than 3 and 1 is better than 2. So if you just choose one thing to do, just go do that one thing. I know we've covered a lot here today in a short amount of time. If you have any questions at all, we have time for those now, and you can always reach out to me individually via email. I'm always happy to help and talk about how we can create really fun and engaging and successful planning days. I think you're muted, Eugene.
Can you hear me now? Thanks so
Yes.
much. Thank you, Jennifer, for a wonderful presentation. We do have some questions, so I'm actually going to turn it over to Henry Joyce, who's sitting here next to me, and he will raise some of those questions that were noted during the presentation.
All right, so our first question is around kind of building that executive stakeholder alignment when executives come in with their own agendas. So what tools, are there software tools or enjoyable exercises that you've seen work to focus the executive team on reaching a consensus around strategic priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think this all starts with a really successful annual planning. Each time you start a process of a strategic planning, making sure you have your one-page strategic plan with those annual goals. Everyone's aligned around those. And this is a good point to make about when you come in to a strategic planning session and there might be some disagreement, you're still walking out aligned on whatever the plan is that you decided to go do. There's also a book called The Trust Edge that I love for building trust in the room. He has a ton of resources online and assessments that I've used in the past. Fantastic book by David Horsinger. And then again, if you're realizing that your executive team isn't aligned and you're realizing that maybe there's a little bit of dysfunction there, this is a favorite of mine as well, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. There's also some exercises you can do in here. So I would start there if you're finding misalignment. And then I think ultimately, you know, if your executive team isn't aligned, that's the #1 thing. So building trust by doing vulnerability exercises is important. A lot of EO forums will do lifeline activities where they're sharing things and making themselves vulnerable and opening up and learning to trust each other. I think the last thing I'll suggest with that too, Brene Brown's Netflix special on vulnerability is epic and a great resource for thinking differently about how to align your team. It really all starts with trust.
Great. Our next question comes from Glenn. He asks, is it typical for companies to assign someone to specifically monitor priorities? And if so, how do you avoid the micromanaging feeling? I think talking about priorities and ownership.
Right. So if you are using communication rhythms effectively, people should be self-reporting on those priorities and setting up those expectations that we can't hide from these. And that's what makes Align such a great tool for executing on strategic plans, because you don't really have to have someone who's micromanaging. You make it a part of your meeting rhythms to pull up your priorities, whether it be in Align or on paper, and say, where are we at on these? And can you give me an update? And so that way they're self-managing, and really the micromanaging just is coming from you pulling it up and talking about it in your executive meeting or in your team meetings, whatever that looks like for you guys.
Great. Do you have any other resources for ideas around activities, for icebreakers, or kind of building that sense of trust across participants?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Google is amazing. You can Google icebreaker activities, and it just depends on your team, like what they think is of fun. So, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was in a strategic planning session where the CEO is a juggler, and we all walked away with juggling balls. And we learned how to juggle in the planning session, and it was cool because we got up and we were able to move our bodies and learn a new skill and get some energy up. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to overthink it. I would say just do what you feel like is good for your team. Make sure there's some sort of outcome associated with it. And there's a ton of resources on Google or your favorite search engine.
Jennifer, question about, obviously as part of a planning session, you want people to speak candidly and honestly. And so do you have any suggestions on dealing with the conflict that might arise when people are very open about their feelings of how the company performed either in the past quarter or individuals performed in terms of priorities and things that they held themselves accountable towards?
Yeah, so I think it all starts with those ground rules. You know, making sure that we're starting off the conversation saying we're all adults here. We expect certain behaviors in this day. And if it does get heated, you know, having a good facilitator in the room is always helpful. Take a break. Like if it's starting to go off the rails, just take a break and give everybody a minute to calm down. And then, you know, it's easy. It doesn't sound easy, but sometimes it's just taking a break and talking to the people who are getting maybe a little bit frustrated and seek to understand where they're coming from. I really, truly believe it all starts with trust in the room. And you can build that through vulnerability. And then that people will share more openly. I think second, it's got to be based around the ground rules and the behaviors you expect your organization to have, which really ultimately goes back to your core values as well. How we interact with people and what behaviors we expect in working within your organization.
This is more of a fundamental question, but who do you think, or how should a company determine who is going to participate in a planning session?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suggest if you're just starting, or maybe if you feel like you're in a rut, starting with just that executive team, making sure the executive team is aligned and understands the process of your strategic planning. And then when you start to add people to the day, it isn't just the like full on, like, let's just add everybody to this process. You're picking people who you know have a mindset of thinking strategically, who want to grow the business, who have a positive attitude, who exhibit your core values, and you're bringing them into the room because they're going to add value. And then eventually you want to get to having the entire company there so that you can get everyone marching in the same direction. But it's really a slow build. So start with that executive team and then add people that you trust and people that, you know, you feel like can add value. They don't have to be leaders. They don't have to be managers. They don't have the title. If you're the person who runs your front desk or your office manager is just really thinks very, very strategically about the company and really cares, they can totally be in that room with you. So it doesn't have to be dependent upon a title or like who's next in rank.
And when you start to fill that room with obviously lots of different people from lots of departments and parts of the organization, what are the ways to sort of encourage all of the voices to be heard? Obviously, there are always going to be those people who are the loud talkers, who are very opinionated and may dominate the conversation. And so how do you sort of, as a facilitator, encourage the quieter voices in the room who also might have great ideas and great insight to be heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good facilitation skill to know how to read the room, right? So if you notice that someone is being quiet or hasn't spoken up, calling on them, asking them to add and telling them, hey, you know, I really feel like you have a lot to add to this because this seems like it's in your wheelhouse. What do you think about this? I think another way that it's helpful, and this also helps with speeding up some of the conversations, is writing it down. And so if you have the entire room, if you ask a question, what do you think X is, or can you share X, write it down and have them read exactly what they wrote. It gets the people who might be a little uncomfortable comfortable with sharing, and because they know that they're coming next. And it also helps speed up the process of getting all of the information out of everybody. also might quiet down the person who talks a lot. Use these tools, something like "you're wasting my time" and "I agree" cards, whatever that squirrel moment is. We use these at Petra, but make it your own. Make it whatever fits your company's style. And if you know that that person's getting off track, you're like, "Hey, guy, you're having a squirrel moment," and you laugh it off, and then move on.
We did have one final question for Rajiv, who asked you, could you repeat the finger idea with the ball that you tossed?
Oh, yeah.
What was called?
Yeah, it's called a thumb ball on Amazon. And so when you just have the whole team stand up, and as a facilitator, you would just toss it to any random person in a circle in the room, or who's ever sitting across the table. When they catch it, you would say, "Look at your right finger." And when you look at your right finger, you look at the one that's under it, and you say, "Someone you'd like to dine with or meet." And then that person answers that question, and then they get to choose the next person that they toss it to and tell them what finger to look at, answer the question, and so on. And there are a lot of cool things on this one specifically. All kinds of themes. You can do this with kids too. But these are really fun, easy to travel with if you travel, because they squish down pretty good. Yeah, and this one's a lot of fun and easy. It doesn't take up too much time.
We did have one question that just came in from Kevin. How well defined should the executive team make the priorities before starting the quarterly planning session with the broader team?
Absolutely, great question. So I feel like this is always the struggle, right? The executive team comes into the planning day and they're like, "This is what we're going to go do." I always like to talk to my executive teams about, you're coming up with these priorities. We don't want it to be so much of a top-down approach. They should be truly in draft format. So they're clear, they have a bias toward action, and they're outcome-oriented. And know that through that discovery process, so we went back up to the steps in the process. Step 2, your team is collecting ideas, hopefully throughout the day, that they think the company might need to go do. And you can find some real gems within that discussion. And so we've got to give the team the opportunity to speak up and to suggest. And so if your executive team comes up with 3 or 4, and you want to have 6 company priorities, you're allowing the team to come up with their own, so they feel like they've had a voice in it and that they can own something and feel like they're really a part of the team. So we really want this to be a ground up effect, and the executive team is getting aligned and really thinking strategically with only drafts coming out of the planning day.
Great. If there are any final questions that anyone would like to pose, please do so now. That was sort of the end of the questions. If there are no more, we'll give everybody one more minute to raise a question if they have one that they'd like to pose to Jennifer. Seeing no more questions coming in, Jennifer, thank you so much for a truly informative and great presentation. For all of those who are still on the call, I will let you know that you will be sent a link to a recording of this presentation, and we encourage you to share it with your team members and others in your organization who couldn't make it, who you think might find value and benefit out of some of these tips for a strategic or a successful strategic planning session. I want to thank all of you for joining us again this month for the Align Coach webinar. Please be sure to mark your calendars. Our next Coach webinar will be on December 11th with Coach Neil Lewis, who will present on keeping score and improving performance, empowering strategic execution with data and critical numbers. So we hope that you will join us next time. And till then, thanks again and have a wonderful month.